Before I tell you any of this, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm not even asking you to think I'm sane. I'm just asking you to listen. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't something I can put in a report. It's not something that goes on record. It's the kind of thing that stays between us. The ones who work the land. The ones who patrol these roads when the sun goes down and the mountains start doing things mountains shouldn't do. My name is Elias Red Crow, and I'm a tribal police officer on Blackfeet land in northwestern Montana. I've been working this job for 6 years now, and in that time I've learned that there are 2 sets of rules out here. The first set is the one they teach you at the academy, the codes and procedures, the radio protocols, the chain of command. That set keeps you employed. The second set is the one that gets passed down from officer to officer, written in a laminated sheet that hangs in the break room of our station, yellowed and cracked, but still legible. That set keeps you alive. I didn't believe in the second set when I started. I thought it was hazing, some kind of initiation ritual for new recruits. The rules seemed ridiculous, the kind of thing you'd find in a campfire story or a bad horror movie. But I learned. We all learn eventually. The ones who don't learn end up in the reports that never get filed, the incidents that get marked as animal attacks or exposure or missing persons. The ones who don't learn end up as warnings for the rest of us. The Blackfeet Reservation covers about 1.5 million acres of land, most of it wilderness. We've got the Rocky Mountain front to the west, where the peaks rise so fast and so high that they seem to lean over you, watching. We've got grasslands and forests and rivers that have been here longer than any human memory. And we've got things in those spaces that don't fit into any report I've ever written. Things that the elders talk about in whispers. Things that the mountains seem to protect or maybe contain, depending on how you look at it. I'm telling you this now because something happened 3 weeks ago. Something that made me realize the rules aren't just about survival. They're about maintaining a balance that's been in place for generations. And that balance is breaking down. I don't know if writing this will help, but I know that staying silent won't. So here it is. The truth about what we deal with out here and the price we pay to keep the rest of you safe. It started on a Tuesday in late October. The aspens had already turned gold, and the first snow had dusted the higher peaks, giving them that white-capped look that draws tourists from all over the world. I was working the evening shift with my partner, Naomi Birdstone. Naomi had been on the force for 12 years, longer than anyone else in our department except Captain Running Elk, and she knew the land better than anyone I'd ever met. She'd grown up on the res, left for college in Missoula, and come back because she said the mountains called her home. I used to think that was poetic. Now I think she meant it literally. We were patrolling the northern sector, up near the Canadian border where the roads turn to dirt, and the cell service disappears entirely. It's beautiful country, the kind that makes you understand why people believed in gods, but it's also isolated in a way that's hard to describe unless you've experienced it. You can drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. You can stand in the middle of the road and hear nothing but wind and the occasional bird. And at night, when the sun drops behind the peaks, the darkness comes fast and complete, like someone pulling a blanket over the world. We'd just finished a welfare check on an elderly woman named Mrs. Kicking Horse, who lived alone in a cabin about 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. She was fine, just lonely, and we'd stayed for coffee and listened to her talk about her grandchildren who lived in Great Falls and never visited. It was the kind of call that reminds you why you took this job, the community aspect, the sense that you're actually helping people. We left her place around 7:30, the sky already purple with twilight, and started heading back toward the main road. That's when dispatch called. Carla James was working the radio that night, and I could hear something in her voice that made me sit up straighter. Carla had been dispatching for 20 years. She didn't get rattled easily. Unit 4, we've got a report of an abandoned vehicle on Cutbank Creek Road. About 2 miles past the Willow Creek turnoff. Caller says it's been there since this afternoon. Doors open, no sign of the driver. Can you respond? Naomi glanced at me. Cutbank Creek Road was in our sector, but it was also one of those places that made the hair on your neck stand up, even in broad daylight. It ran along the base of the mountains, right where the foothills started to climb, and it was known for being a place where things happened. Accidents, disappearances, hikers who went off trail and never came back. The official explanations were always the same. Wildlife encounters, exposure, poor preparation. But the locals knew better. The locals avoided that road after dark if they could help it. Unit 4 responding, Naomi said into the radio, ETA 20 minutes. We drove in silence for a while, the headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The road twisted and climbed, the trees pressing close on both sides, and I found myself watching the shadows between the trunks, looking for movement. That was something I'd started doing after my first year on the job, a habit I couldn't break. You learn to watch the spaces between things out here because that's where the wrong things show themselves. You remember the rules for Cutbank Creek? Naomi asked. Don't leave the vehicle unless absolutely necessary. If you have to leave the vehicle, stay within sight of the headlights. And if you hear whistling from the trees, get back in the truck immediately. She nodded. Good, just making sure. You think this is going to be one of those calls? Naomi didn't answer right away. She was watching the road, her hands steady on the wheel, but I could see the tension in her jaw. I think it's an abandoned vehicle on Cutbank Creek Road at night, she said finally. That's enough to be careful. We found the vehicle about 10 minutes later, right where the caller had described. It was a silver Honda CR-V with Colorado plates, parked at an angle on the shoulder like the driver had pulled over in a hurry. Both front doors were open, the dome light still on, casting a weak yellow glow that seemed to make the surrounding darkness even deeper. There was no sign of anyone nearby. Naomi pulled up behind the Honda and killed the engine, but left the headlights on. For a moment we just sat there, looking at the scene. The mountains loomed to our left, their peaks invisible against the night sky, but their presence unmistakable. A wall of darkness that seemed to absorb the light. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of pine and something else, something metallic that I couldn't quite identify. Colorado plates, I said. Tourist. Probably. This time of year we get a lot of people coming up to see the fall colors, take pictures of the mountains. Naomi unholstered her weapon and checked it. Ready? We got out of the truck together, moving slow, sweeping the area with our flashlights. The Honda's interior was empty, no people, no obvious signs of struggle. A woman's purse sat on the passenger seat, open, with a wallet and phone visible inside. Car keys were still in the ignition. On the back seat I could see hiking gear, a day pack, water bottles, a trail map spread out like someone had been planning a route. Looks like she went for a hike and didn't come back, I said. At this hour? Naomi was circling the vehicle, her flashlight beam tracking across the ground. Sun went down 2 hours ago. Even an inexperienced hiker would know better than to... She stopped. What? She pointed her flashlight at the dirt beside the driver's door. I came around and looked. There were footprints there, small ones, probably a woman's hiking boots. They led away from the vehicle toward the tree line, clear and distinct in the soft earth. But that wasn't what had made Naomi stop. What made her stop were the other prints. They were alongside the boot prints, paralleling them, but they were wrong. At first glance, they looked like animal tracks, maybe a large dog or a wolf, the kind of thing you'd expect to see in this country. But the spacing was off. Too far apart for a four-legged gait, too close together for anything walking normally. And the prints themselves were strange, elongated, like something had been walking on its toes, or on feet that weren't quite feet anymore. What the hell is that? I asked, even though I already knew I wouldn't get an answer. Naomi crouched down, studying the tracks without touching them. Whatever it is, it was following her. She stood up and looked toward the trees, and they went that way. I followed her gaze. The tree line was maybe 30 yards from the road, a wall of lodgepole pines and spruce that seemed to swallow the flashlight beams. Beyond that was wilderness, miles of it, climbing up into the mountains where even experienced outdoorsmen got lost. If the woman had gone in there after dark, following or being followed by whatever had made those tracks, she was in serious trouble. "We need to call it in," I said. "Get search and rescue out here." Already on it. Naomi was back at the truck, keying the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We've got a possible missing person at the abandoned vehicle location. Signs indicate the individual may have entered the wilderness area on foot, requesting search and rescue activation and additional units." Carla's voice came back, tense but professional. "Copy, Unit 4. SAR has been notified. Additional units en route, ETA 45 minutes. Be advised, you are authorized to begin preliminary search but are reminded of nighttime wilderness protocols." Nighttime wilderness protocols. That was the official way of saying the second set of rules. The ones on the laminated sheet. The ones that kept you alive. "Understood, dispatch. We'll hold position until backup arrives." We stood by the truck, watching the tree line, listening. The wind had died down and the silence was absolute. The kind of silence that seems to have weight. No insects, no birds, no rustle of animals in the underbrush. Just the darkness and the mountains, and that faint metallic smell that seemed to be getting stronger. "Naomi," I said quietly, "what do you think made those tracks?" She didn't look at me. She was staring at the trees, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. "I think," she said slowly, "that we're going to wait for backup. And I think that if we hear anything from those woods, anything at all, we're going to get in the truck and we're not going to get out again until the sun comes up." I wanted to argue. Someone was out there, possibly hurt, possibly in danger. Every instinct I had was screaming to go after her, to help. But I'd been on the job long enough to know that those instincts could get you killed out here. The rules existed for a reason. People had died learning that reason. So we waited. 20 minutes later, we heard the whistling. It came from the trees, high and melodic, almost like a bird, but not quite. The notes rose and fell in a pattern that seemed random at first, but then started to repeat. A phrase of 5 or 6 tones that played over and over, and it was getting closer. In the truck, Naomi said, "Now." We moved fast, not running but not walking either. The whistling was louder now, coming from multiple directions, like there was more than one source. Like something was surrounding us. I could feel my heart pounding, my hands shaking as I yanked open the passenger door and threw myself inside. Naomi was already in the driver's seat, starting the engine. The headlights flared and I saw something at the edge of the light, just for a second. A shape, tall, thin, standing at the tree line. It was there, and then it wasn't. Moving back into the shadows so fast I couldn't be sure I'd seen it at all. "Did you?" "I saw it." Naomi's voice was flat. She put the truck in gear and pulled forward, turning us around so we were facing back down the road. "We're going to wait here until backup arrives. We're not getting out of this vehicle. And we're not looking at the trees anymore. But the woman is either already dead or she'll be dead by the time we could find her. That's the truth, Elias. I know it's hard to hear, but that's how it works out here. You go into those woods at night, chasing whatever made those tracks, and you don't come back. That's not a guess. That's history." The whistling continued for another 10 minutes, circling us, probing. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, heavy with the sense of something watching, waiting. Backup arrived 45 minutes later. 2 more units plus the search and rescue team. By then, the moon had risen, casting pale light across the landscape, and the mountains were visible again, their peaks sharp against the stars. We briefed the SAR commander, showed him the tracks, explained what we'd heard. He listened without expression, then organized his team and headed into the trees with dogs and thermal imaging equipment. They found her body 3 hours later, about a mile from the road. She was a 32-year-old woman from Boulder named Megan Cole. She'd been hiking in Glacier National Park for the past week and had decided to take a detour through the reservation to see some of the less touristy areas. According to her journal, which they found in her pack, she'd wanted to photograph the mountains at sunset. The official cause of death was exposure complicated by blunt force trauma. They said she'd probably fallen in the dark, hit her head on a rock, and succumbed to the cold before she could find her way back. It was a clean explanation, the kind that satisfied the coroner and the family and anyone else who asked questions. But I saw the body before they moved it. I saw the marks on her arms, the way her fingers were worn down to bloody stubs like she'd been clawing at something. I saw the expression frozen on her face. She hadn't fallen, she'd been running. After shift that night, Naomi and I sat in the parking lot of the station, neither of us ready to go home. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, the stars fading one by one, and for the first time in hours I felt like I could breathe normally. "That thing we saw," I said, "at the tree line, what was it?" Naomi was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was tired. "My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was a kid. Stories about things that lived in the mountains. Things that had been here before the Blackfeet, before any people. She said they weren't good or evil, they were just old. Old and hungry and patient." She looked at me. She said the mountains protected us from them most of the time, kept them contained. But sometimes, when someone went where they shouldn't or did something they shouldn't, the mountains would let one through. Let one through to do what? To remind us, she said, that this isn't our land. We just live on it. I thought about Megan Cole, about her journal and her camera and her desire to photograph the mountains at sunset. I thought about the tracks beside her footprints, the whistling in the trees, the shape at the edge of the light, and I thought about the rules on the laminated sheet, the ones that seemed ridiculous until you understood what they were really protecting you from. "Naomi," I said, "what happens when the mountains stop containing them? What happens when they start letting more through?" She didn't answer. She just started her truck and drove away, leaving me alone in the parking lot with the sunrise and the question and the feeling that something had changed. That the balance my grandmother's grandmother had helped maintain was shifting. That the rules might not be enough anymore. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, things have gotten worse. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came 5 days after we found Megan Cole's body. I was on day shift, covering the eastern sector with a new officer named Tommy Whitecalf, who'd transferred in from the Crow Reservation down south. Tommy was young, maybe 24, and he had that eager energy that new cops have before the job wears it out of them. He asked a lot of questions, which I appreciated, and he listened when I answered, which I appreciated even more, but he also had that skepticism about the rules. That look in his eye that said he thought the older officers were pulling his leg. I recognized that look. I'd had it myself once. We were doing a routine patrol along the 2 Medicine Road when we got a call about livestock mutilation at the Spotted Eagle Ranch. Leonard Spotted Eagle ran about 200 head of cattle on his property, and he was reporting that he'd found 3 of them dead that morning, killed in a way he'd never seen in 40 years of ranching. Probably coyotes, Tommy said as we drove out to the ranch. Or wolves. They've been coming down from the park looking for easy prey. Maybe, I said. You don't think so? I think we should wait until we see it before we decide what did it. The Spotted Eagle Ranch sat in a valley between two ridges, with good grass and a creek running through the middle of the property. It was well maintained, fences in good repair, outbuildings solid. Leonard met us at the gate. A lean man in his 60s with a weathered face and hands that looked like they'd done every kind of hard work there was. He didn't say much, just nodded when we introduced ourselves and led us across the pasture to where the carcasses were. I'd seen livestock kills before. Wolves usually go for the throat or the hindquarters, tearing at the flesh, leaving a mess of blood and scattered organs. Mountain lions are cleaner, suffocating their prey and then eating in a more methodical way. What I saw in that pasture didn't look like either. The 3 cows were lying in a rough triangle, about 20 yards apart from each other. They were intact, no visible wounds, no blood on the grass around them. At first glance, you might have thought they'd just laid down and died. But when I got closer, I could see that something was wrong with them. Their eyes were open, filmed over with white, and their mouths were stretched wide like they'd been trying to scream. And they were stiff, not with rigor mortis but with something else, their muscles locked in positions that looked agonizing. Jesus, Tommy breathed. Leonard was watching us, his face unreadable. I've seen wolves take cattle. I've seen lions do it. Even had a grizzly come through once and kill a calf. This isn't any of that. I crouched down next to the nearest cow, careful not to touch it. The hide looked normal, no punctures, no tears, but there was a smell coming off it. Faint, but distinct. Not decay. It was too fresh for that. Something else. Something that reminded me of the metallic scent at the Cutbank Creek scene. Any tracks? I asked. That's the other thing. Leonard led us to the edge of the triangle, where the grass was shorter and the soil showed through. Found these this morning. The prints were the same as the ones at Cutbank Creek. Elongated, widely spaced, wrong. They circled each of the cows, coming close but never quite touching, and then they led away toward the ridge to the west, toward the mountains. What do you think made those? Leonard asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. I stood up. I don't know, but I think we should get the tribal wildlife officer out here, take some samples, see what the lab says. The lab, Leonard repeated. Right. He looked toward the mountains, squinting against the morning sun. My grandfather used to tell me that the mountains have moods, that sometimes they're peaceful and sometimes they're angry. He said when they're angry, they send things down into the valley to remind us who's in charge. He turned back to me. You think that's crazy? No, I said, I don't. We called in the wildlife officer and spent another hour at the ranch, taking photos, marking the location of the tracks, writing up a report that would get filed under animal attack, species unknown. It was the same language we used for everything we couldn't explain. A catch-all category that everyone in the department understood meant something else entirely. On the drive back to the station, Tommy was quiet. He kept looking out the window at the mountains. His brow furrowed like he was trying to work something out. Those tracks, he said finally. They weren't made by any animal I know. No. So, what made them? I thought about how to answer. I thought about the rules on the laminated sheet, about Naomi's grandmother's stories, about the shape I'd seen at the tree line at Cutbank Creek. I thought about all the things I'd learned in 6 years on this job, the things that didn't go in reports, the things that stayed between those of us who worked the land. There are things out here, I said slowly, that don't have names. Or maybe they have names, but they're not names we use anymore. The elders know about them. The medicine people know. They've always been here, long before us, and they're usually content to stay in the high places, in the spaces we don't go. But sometimes they come down. Why? I don't know. Maybe they're hungry, maybe they're curious, maybe we did something to disturb them. I looked at him, the rules we have, the protocols for night shifts and wilderness calls and all of it. Those aren't superstitions, they're survival instructions. People learned them the hard way, and people died when they didn't follow them. Tommy was silent for a while. What do we do about the cattle? About whatever's making those tracks? We file the report. We tell Leonard to keep his animals close to the house for a while. We let the elders know what we found. I paused, and we pay attention, because if something's coming down from the mountains more often, if it's getting bolder, that means something's changed, and we need to figure out what. That evening, after shift, I drove out to see Isaac Heavy Runner. Isaac was one of the last traditional elders on the reservation. A man in his 80s who'd spent his whole life learning the old ways. He'd been a bundle keeper, a ceremonial leader, a teacher to generations of Blackfeet who wanted to understand their heritage. He lived alone in a small house on the northern edge of the res up near the border, and he rarely came to town anymore. His health was failing, his eyesight going, but his mind was still sharp, and his knowledge was irreplaceable. I'd met Isaac a few years ago, after a call that had shaken me badly. A hiker had gone missing in the Badger 2 medicine area, and we'd found him 3 days later, alive but unable to speak. His hair turned completely white. He never recovered, never spoke another word, just sat in the care facility in Browning, staring at the wall with an expression of terror that never left his face. I'd needed to understand what had happened to him, and Naomi had sent me to Isaac. He'd told me things that night that I still hadn't fully processed. Things about the old agreements, the boundaries that had been established generations ago between the Blackfeet and the things that lived in the mountains. Things about the ceremonies that maintained those boundaries and what happened when they were neglected. Now I needed to ask him about the cattle, about the tracks, about the feeling I had that something was shifting. Isaac's house was dark when I pulled up, but I could see smoke coming from the chimney and a faint light in the back window. I knocked and waited, and after a while the door opened. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, thinner and more fragile, but his eyes were the same, dark and deep and filled with knowledge that most people couldn't even imagine. "Elias Red Crow," he said, "I wondered when you'd come. You knew I was coming. I knew someone would come in." The house was warm, heated by a wood stove that filled the air with the smell of pine smoke. The walls were covered with traditional items, a war bonnet in a glass case, beaded bags and moccasins, photographs of ceremonies and gatherings going back decades. Isaac lowered himself into a chair by the stove and gestured for me to sit across from him. "Tell me," he said. I told him everything. Megan Cole, the whistling, the shape at the tree line, the cattle at the Spotted Eagle Ranch, the tracks that weren't made by any animal I knew. As I talked, Isaac listened without interrupting, his eyes half closed, his hands folded in his lap. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows. "There is a word," he said finally. "In the old language, it means the ones who were here before. Before the Blackfeet, before any people, before the mountains themselves wore their current shapes. They were here, and they made agreements with the land. They claimed certain places as their own, and they stayed there, in the high places, in the spaces between. What happened to them? Nothing happened to them. They're still there. They've always been there. But there were boundaries, rules. They stayed in their places, we stayed in ours. As long as the ceremonies were performed, as long as the old ways were respected, the boundaries held." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "But the old ways are dying, Elias. The young people don't learn them. The ceremonies are forgotten. The bundles are sitting in museums instead of being kept by the people. And when the boundaries aren't maintained, they start coming down. Yes, and they're hungry, not for food. They don't eat like we do. They're hungry for something else. For fear, maybe. For attention. For acknowledgement that they still exist, that they still have power. Isaac leaned forward. The cattle. Were they killed or were they taken? I thought about the carcasses, the way the muscles were locked, the expressions of terror frozen on their faces. I don't know. They were dead, but there weren't any wounds. It was like something had just drained them. Isaac nodded slowly. That's how it starts. They take the animals first, testing the boundaries, seeing how far they can push. Then they take other things. Attention, memory, sanity. He paused. Lives. What can we do? The ceremonies need to be performed. The boundaries need to be reinforced. But he shook his head. I'm too old, too weak. The ceremonies require strength I don't have anymore, and there's no one to take my place. The knowledge is dying with me. There must be something. Someone else who knows. There were 4 of us who kept the old knowledge. Alice Running Crane died last winter. Morris 3 Bears has dementia, can't remember his own name. Helen Kicking Woman moved to California 20 years ago and never came back. Isaac's voice was heavy with grief. I'm the last, and I'm dying too. 6 months, maybe less. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. So what happens when you're gone? What happens to the boundaries? Isaac looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen there before. Fear. Then God help us all, he said, because the mountains will start watching, and they won't stop. I left Isaac's house that night with more questions than answers. The drive back to Browning was dark and quiet. The mountains invisible against the sky, but present. Always present. Their weight pressing down on the land. I thought about what Isaac had said, about the boundaries failing, about the things that were starting to come down from the high places. I thought about Megan Cole and the cattle, and the tracks that weren't made by any animal. And I thought about the rules on the laminated sheet. The rules that had kept officers alive for generations. If the boundaries were failing, if the things in the mountains were getting bolder, how long would those rules be enough? The next 3 days were quiet. No more livestock kills, no missing persons, no strange calls in the night. I started to wonder if maybe Isaac was wrong. If maybe the incidents were isolated, not part of a pattern. Maybe the boundaries were holding after all. Then we got the call about the hikers. It was a Saturday morning, bright and cold, the kind of day that draws people from all over to the park and the surrounding wilderness. 3 hikers from Washington State had started out on the 2 Medicine Trail the day before, planning to camp overnight and return Sunday afternoon. When they didn't check in with their contact person by noon on Sunday, she called it in. Search and rescue was activated by early afternoon, and by evening they'd found the camp. The tents were still standing, neat and orderly, food stored properly in bear-proof containers. Packs were organized, sleeping bags unrolled. Everything was exactly as it should be for a group that had set up camp and planned to stay. Except the hikers were gone. No tracks leading away from the camp. No signs of struggle. No blood, no torn fabric. Nothing to indicate what had happened to 3 healthy adults in the prime of their lives. They'd been there, and then they hadn't. As simply as that. I was part of the search team that went out that night, despite the protocols, despite the rules. We had to. 3 people were missing, and every hour mattered. We spread out in a grid pattern, calling their names, sweeping the terrain with flashlights and thermal imaging. We searched until 2 in the morning, until the SAR commander finally called it off and told us to get some rest, to start again at first light. We never found them. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. 3 people walked into the wilderness and vanished without a trace. The case is still open, still listed as missing persons, circumstances unknown. But everyone who worked it knows the truth. They're not going to be found. Not in any condition we'd want to find them. At the briefing, after the search was officially suspended, Captain Running Elk stood in front of the assembled officers and SAR volunteers, and said something I'll never forget. "We've had 4 incidents in the past 2 weeks," she said. A tourist dead at Cutbank Creek. 3 cattle killed at the Spotted Eagle Ranch. 3 hikers missing from 2 Medicine. These incidents are being investigated separately, but I want everyone here to understand something. We are seeing an escalation. Something is happening on this land, something we can't explain through normal channels, and it's getting worse. She looked around the room, meeting every eye. I'm not going to stand here and tell you what's causing it. We all have our own beliefs, our own understandings of what lives out there in the wilderness. But I am going to tell you this. The protocols exist for a reason. The rules on that sheet in the break room exist for a reason. Whatever is happening, whatever is out there, the only way we stay safe is by following the rules. No exceptions, no heroics. You follow the protocols, you stay alive. You don't, you end up like those hikers. Do I make myself clear? Everyone nodded. But I could see it in their faces, that the same thing I was feeling. The rules might not be enough anymore. The boundaries were failing, and we were going to have to do more than just survive. We were going to have to fight back. After Captain Running Elk's briefing, I went back to see Isaac Heavy Runner. I didn't know what else to do. If the boundaries were failing, if the old ceremonies were the only way to restore them, then someone had to learn how to perform those ceremonies. And Isaac was running out of time. He was waiting for me on his porch when I pulled up, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill, watching the sun go down behind the mountains. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but there was a determination there that I hadn't seen before. "You heard about the hikers," he said. "Yes, it's accelerating, faster than I thought it would." He stood up slowly, painfully, and gestured for me to follow him inside. "We need to talk about what comes next." Inside, he'd laid out items on his kitchen table. A bundle wrapped in red cloth, a pipe with a carved stone bowl, a pouch of tobacco, eagle feathers, sweetgrass, things I recognized from ceremonies I'd attended as a child, before my family had drifted away from the traditional ways. "I've been thinking since you came to see me," Isaac said, "about what can be done, about who can do it." He looked at me. "I want to teach you." I shook my head. I don't have the training. It takes years to learn those ceremonies, and you said yourself you only have months. It takes years to learn them properly. But we don't have years. We have weeks, maybe less before this gets too bad to contain. He sat down heavily in his chair. "I can teach you the core of it. The essential ceremonies, the ones that maintain the boundaries. It won't make you a medicine man, that's a lifetime's work, but it might be enough to hold things together until someone else can be found. And if it's not enough, then we tried. That's more than anyone else is doing." I looked at the items on the table, at the weight of tradition and responsibility they represented. I thought about my grandmother, who'd known some of the old ways and tried to teach them to my mother, who hadn't been interested. I thought about how much had been lost in just 2 generations, how close we were to losing it all. "Okay," I said, "teach me." For the next 2 weeks, I spent every moment I wasn't on duty at Isaac's house. He taught me the songs, the prayers, the proper way to handle the sacred objects. He explained the meanings behind the ceremonies, the relationships between the different elements, the connections to the land and the sky, and the spirits that inhabited both. He told me stories I'd never heard, about the beings that lived in the mountains, about the agreements that had been made with them, about the consequences when those agreements were broken. It was like drinking from a fire hose. Information poured into me faster than I could process it, and I knew I was only scratching the surface of knowledge that Isaac had spent 80 years accumulating. But he was patient, and he was thorough, and he made sure I understood the most important things: the boundaries, the ceremonies that maintained them, the protocols, not the ones on the laminated sheet, but the older ones, the ones that the laminated sheet was based on. The rules your department follows, Isaac said one night. They're simplified versions of what I'm teaching you. They keep officers alive, but they don't address the underlying problem. They're like treating symptoms instead of the disease. So, what's the disease? Neglect. Forgetting. The agreements were made a long time ago, and they required maintenance. Ceremonies performed at certain times in certain places and certain ways. As long as those ceremonies were done, the boundaries held. But when they stopped being done, he shrugged. The beings in the mountains are patient, but they're not infinitely patient. They've been waiting a long time for someone to remember them, to honor the old agreements. When no one did, they started pushing back. And now they're taking people, taking livestock. They're reminding us that they exist, that they have power, that we ignored them at our peril. Isaac's voice was sad. They're not evil, Elias. That's important for you to understand. They're not demons or monsters. They're old, older than we can comprehend, and they have their own needs, their own purposes. For a long time, those purposes and ours were compatible. We stayed out of their spaces, they stayed out of ours, and everyone was satisfied. But the agreement was broken, and now they're collecting what they're owed. Can the agreement be restored? Can we make things right again? Maybe, if the ceremonies are performed, if the boundaries are reinforced, if someone shows them that we remember, that we honor the old ways. He looked at me intently. But it will be dangerous. The ceremonies require going to certain places, high places, places where the beings are strong. If they don't accept the offering, if they decide the breach is too great to be repaired. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The night before, I was supposed to perform the first ceremony. I got a call from dispatch. Carla's voice was tight, controlled in that way that meant something very bad had happened. Elias, we've got a situation. Officer down, Naomi Birdstone. She was responding to a call near Badger Creek and she stopped transmitting. Last GPS position puts her vehicle about 2 miles up the Badger Creek Road. Captain wants all available units responding. My blood went cold. Naomi, my partner, the best officer I knew, the one who'd taught me more about this job than anyone. I made it to the location in 20 minutes, driving faster than I should have on those mountain roads. 3 other units were already there, their lights flashing red and blue against the darkness. Naomi's truck was on the side of the road, doors closed, engine off. No sign of her. Tommy Whitecalf was there, his face pale. We found her radio about 50 yards into the trees, he said, and her weapon, but no sign of her. Tracks. He nodded and pointed. In the beam of my flashlight I could see them. The same elongated prints, the same wrong spacing. They came out of the trees, circled Naomi's vehicle, and then led back into the darkness. Captain Running Elk arrived a few minutes later. She assessed the scene, listened to the reports, made decisions with the calm efficiency that had made her captain. SAR was activated. A perimeter was established. Search teams were organized, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't expect to find Naomi alive. "This is my fault," I said to her quietly, while the others were preparing to search. "I should have been with her. I've been spending all my time with Isaac, learning the ceremonies, and I let her go out alone. She wasn't alone. She had dispatch. She had backup en route. She followed protocol." Captain Running Elk's voice was firm. "This isn't about blame, Elias. This is about a situation that's escalated beyond anything we've seen before. Naomi knew the risks. She knew the rules, and she still got taken. So what do we do?" She looked toward the mountains, invisible in the darkness but present, always present. "We search, we hope, and we pray that whatever's out there decides to let her go." We searched all night. Every officer on the force, plus volunteers from the community. plus SAR teams from 3 counties. We covered every inch of that wilderness, calling Naomi's name, sweeping with lights and thermal imaging and dogs that tracked a scent. We found nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign that she'd ever been there at all except for her radio and her weapon lying in the dirt. By dawn, I knew she was gone. I drove straight from the search area to Isaac's house. He was on his porch again, watching the sun rise, and when he saw my face, he didn't need to ask what had happened. "The ceremony," I said. "I need to do it now, tonight." "Elias, they took my partner. They took Naomi. She's the best person I know, and they took her, and I'm not going to wait anymore." I could hear my voice shaking, feel the grief and rage boiling up inside me. "You said the ceremonies might restore the boundaries, might make them give back what they've taken. I need to try." Isaac studied me for a long moment. "The ceremony I was preparing you for is the lesser one, the one that maintains boundaries that already exist. What you're talking about, trying to reclaim someone who's been taken, that's different. That's the greater ceremony. It requires going to the high places, to their territory. It requires making an offering they can't refuse." "What kind of offering?" He was quiet. Then he said, "Something precious. Something that matters to you more than your own life. That's the price for taking back what they've claimed." I thought about Naomi, about her steadiness, her wisdom, her dry humor that could make you laugh even on the worst shifts. I thought about the years we'd worked together, the calls we'd handled, the things we'd seen that we never talked about with anyone else. She was my partner, my friend, the closest thing I had to family on this reservation. "Tell me what to do," I said. Isaac taught me the greater ceremony that day. It was more complex than anything he'd shown me before, with songs that had to be sung in a specific order and offerings that had to be placed in specific patterns. The location mattered too. It had to be performed at one of the old places, the places where the boundaries between our world and theirs were thin. There was one such place in the mountains above Badger Creek, a high meadow that the Blackfeet had used for vision quests and sacred ceremonies for generations. "You'll need to go alone," Isaac said. "The ceremony only works for one person, and you'll need to go at night when the boundaries are thinnest. That violates every protocol we have. Yes, it does." He handed me the bundle with the sacred objects. "The protocols keep you safe from them, but if you want to treat with them, if you want to get Naomi back, you have to go to where they are, on their terms." I spent the rest of the day preparing. I told Captain Running Elk what I was planning, not the details, but enough for her to understand that I was going into the mountains that night and might not come back. She tried to talk me out of it. When that didn't work, she made me promise to check in by radio every hour and to abort if anything went wrong. "Elias," she said as I was leaving, "if this works, if you bring Naomi back, we're going to have a long conversation about what's really happening out here, about what we need to do to stop it." "Yes, ma'am. We will." At sunset, I drove up Badger Creek Road to the trailhead. The mountains rose above me, their peaks catching the last light of day, while the valleys below fell into shadow. Somewhere up there, in one of those high meadows, I would find the place where the boundaries were thin, and somewhere up there I hoped I would find Naomi. I started hiking. The trail was steep and rough, switchbacking up through forest and scree fields and patches of snow that hadn't melted since the previous winter. I moved fast, despite the weight of the bundle on my back, driven by urgency and fear, and the knowledge that every minute mattered. The air got colder as I climbed, thinner, and soon I could see my breath misting in the beam of my headlamp. After 2 hours, I reached the meadow. It was just as Isaac had described, a high alpine bowl surrounded by peaks, with a small lake in the center that reflected the stars. The grass was brown and dead, waiting for next year's growth, and the silence was absolute. No wind, no animals, no sound at all except my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground. I set up the ceremony at the edge of the lake, laying out the sacred objects in the patterns Isaac had taught me. The pipe, the tobacco, the sweet grass, the eagle feathers, and my offering, a small beaded pouch that had belonged to my grandmother, given to me when she died, the most precious thing I owned, something that mattered to me more than my own life. I lit the sweet grass and began to sing. The song was old, older than the Blackfeet, passed down from the people who had been here before us, who had made the first agreements with the beings in the mountains. It was a song of calling, of invitation, of offering, a song that said, "I remember you, I honor you, I come to treat with you in good faith." I sang it 3 times as Isaac had instructed. Then I waited. For a long time nothing happened. The stars wheeled overhead. The lake lay still and black, and the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I started to think that I'd done something wrong, that the ceremony hadn't worked, that I'd come all this way for nothing. Then I saw them. They came out of the darkness at the edges of the meadow, shapes that weren't quite solid, that seemed to shift and flow like smoke. At first, there were just a few, then more, until they surrounded the lake in a loose circle, watching me with eyes that reflected the starlight like animals' eyes. They were tall, impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles, and faces that were almost human but not quite. One of them stepped forward. It moved without moving, covering the distance between the edge of the meadow and the lake in a single moment. And then it was standing in front of me, close enough to touch. Up close I could see it more clearly. The pale skin, the elongated features, the eyes that were dark and deep and ancient beyond comprehension. "You come to our place," it said, and its voice was like wind through dead trees. "You sing the old songs, you bring offerings." It looked at the beaded pouch. "Why?" "You took someone," I said. "A woman, my partner. I want her back. She came to our territory. She was warned. She did not listen. She was doing her job. She was trying to help people. Her intentions do not concern us. The boundaries were crossed. The price was paid." I felt my hands shaking. The boundaries were crossed because the ceremonies weren't done, because the old ways were forgotten. But I remember now. I'm here to make it right. The being studied me. I could feel its attention like a physical pressure, probing, assessing. "The ceremonies have not been done for many years. The debt is large. Then tell me how to pay it. Tell me what you want, and I'll do it." It was silent for a long time. Then it said, "The woman you seek is here, in the space between. She is not dead, not yet, but she is changing. Soon she will be like us, and she will not want to return." My heart lurched. "Let me see her, please." The being raised one long hand and made a gesture. The air beside me rippled, and suddenly Naomi was there. She looked the same, but different. Paler, thinner, with a distant expression in her eyes like she was seeing something far away. She was standing, but she didn't seem to recognize me, didn't seem to know where she was. "Naomi," I said. "Naomi, it's me, Elias. I've come to take you home." She turned her head slowly, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition flicker in her eyes. Then it faded. "Home," she said, and her voice was hollow. "I don't remember home." "The change has begun," the being said. "She has breathed our air, drunk our water. Soon she will forget everything she was. Then let her go. Take me instead. Take my offering. I'll pay whatever debt is owed." The being looked at the beaded pouch again, then at me. "Your offering is worthy, but the debt is not yours alone. It belongs to all your people. Generations of forgetting, generations of broken promises, Then tell me how to fix it. Tell me what needs to be done and I'll do it. I'll spend the rest of my life doing it if I have to." Again, that long silence. The other beings in the circle were motionless, watching. "There is a way," the being said finally. "The old agreement can be restored, but it requires commitment. It requires sacrifice. Not a single offering, but a lifetime of offerings. The ceremonies must be performed. The boundaries must be maintained. Someone must take responsibility for remembering. I'll do it. Teach me, and I'll do it. And if you fail, if you forget, as your ancestors forgot, I won't." The being studied me for another long moment. Then it nodded slowly. "We will hold you to that promise, Elias Red Crow. You will be our keeper, our reminder. For as long as you live, you will maintain the boundaries and we will stay in our places. But if you fail," its eyes seemed to glow brighter, "if you fail, we will take not just one. We will take many, and there will be no coming back. I understand." The being made another gesture. Naomi shuddered, gasped, and suddenly her eyes were clear. She looked at me, confused, frightened, but present. Herself again. "Elias," she whispered. "Where? What happened? I was on a call and then—" She looked around at the beings, at the meadow, at the stars, and her face went white. Oh God, it's okay," I said. "I'm taking you home. We're going home." I gathered up the sacred objects, left the beaded pouch as my offering, and helped Naomi to her feet. The beings watched us as we walked out of the meadow, their eyes following us, and I could feel the weight of the promise I'd made. A lifetime of offerings. A lifetime of maintaining boundaries. A lifetime of remembering, so that no one else would have to. We made it back to the trailhead by dawn. Captain Running Elk was waiting there with half the department, and when she saw Naomi she ran forward and hugged her, something I'd never seen her do before. There were questions, so many questions, but I told them it would have to wait. Right now, we needed to get Naomi to a hospital, get her checked out, make sure she was okay. She was. Physically, at least. Mentally, she struggled for a while, with nightmares and flashbacks and moments when she'd look at the mountains with an expression of pure terror. But she came back to work after a month, and she's still the best officer I know. As for me, I kept my promise. 6 months have passed since that night in the meadow. In that time, I've performed the ceremonies 12 times. Once each month during the full moon, and again during the dark moon. I've learned more songs, more prayers, more rituals than I ever thought I could hold in my mind. The words come to me now without thinking, rising up from somewhere deep, somewhere that feels older than my own memory. Isaac Heavy Runner used to say that the knowledge was already inside us, that we just needed to remember it. I didn't understand what he meant until I started doing the work. Now I think he was right. The songs feel less like something I learned and more like something I'm uncovering, layer by layer, like brushing dirt off an artifact that's been buried for generations. Isaac died in February, on a night when the temperature dropped to 30 below, and the stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. I was with him at the end, sitting by his bed in that small house on the northern edge of the res, listening to him breathe. He'd been declining for weeks, his body finally giving out after 87 years of hard use, but his mind stayed sharp until the very last day. In those final hours, he talked to me about things he'd never mentioned before. About his own teachers, the ones who'd passed the knowledge to him when he was young. About mistakes he'd made, ceremonies he'd performed wrong, times he'd almost lost his life to the beings in the mountains. About the weight of being the last one, the only keeper of secrets that had been guarded for generations. "You're not ready," he told me, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one's ever ready. but you're what we have." He reached out and gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Don't let it die with you, Elias. Find someone, teach them. The chain can't break." He died an hour later, peacefully, slipping away between one breath and the next. I sat with him until dawn, then called Captain Running Elk and told her what had happened. The community came together for his funeral, hundreds of people filling the church and spilling out onto the lawn, elders and young people and everyone in between. They told stories about Isaac, about the lives he'd touched, the ceremonies he'd performed, the knowledge he'd preserved. But none of them knew the whole truth. None of them knew about the agreement with the beings in the mountains, about the boundaries that had to be maintained, about the price that had to be paid to keep everyone safe. That knowledge stayed with me, heavy and solitary, a burden I couldn't share. In his final days, Isaac had taught me everything he could. He'd poured a lifetime of knowledge into me, cramming decades of learning into weeks and days and hours, until I thought my head would split from the pressure of it all. Songs I'd never heard, ceremonies I'd never seen, protocols for situations I hoped I'd never face. He'd been ruthless about it, pushing me past exhaustion, past frustration, past the point where I thought I couldn't absorb anymore. "You don't have the luxury of learning slowly," he'd said. "The mountains won't wait for you to be ready. You learn now, or people die." It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. A lifetime of knowledge can't be transferred in a few weeks, no matter how hard you try. There are things Isaac knew that I'll never know, ceremonies he could perform that I'll never master, understandings he had about the beings and their ways that died with him and are gone forever. But what he gave me was something, a foundation, a start, enough to keep the boundaries holding, at least for now. The incidents have slowed down since that night in the meadow. Not stopped entirely. There was another livestock killing in March. 6 sheep found dead on the Kicking Horse property with no visible wounds, their eyes filmed over with white, and their muscles locked in that terrible rigor I'd seen before. And in April, a hiker got lost near Chief Mountain and wandered for 3 days before search and rescue found him. He was physically unharmed but psychologically shattered, unable to speak coherently about what had happened to him. He kept talking about shapes in the trees, about whistling that followed him wherever he went, about feeling like something was hurting him, keeping him lost on purpose. He's in a psychiatric facility in Missoula now. The doctors say he's making progress, but his family says he's not the same person he was before. So, it's not over. The beings are still there, still watching, still occasionally reaching across the boundaries to remind us of their presence. But the pace has decreased. The frequency has dropped. The boundaries are holding, at least for now, and I have to believe that's because of the ceremonies, because of the work I'm doing month after month, keeping the old promises, maintaining the old agreements. I have to believe it matters, but I know it won't last forever. I know that I'm one person with one lifetime, and that when I'm gone, there will need to be someone else to take my place, someone to learn what I've learned, to keep the promises I've made, to maintain the boundaries for another generation. The chain can't break. Isaac's last words to me, and they echo in my head every day. I've started looking for that person. There are young people on the reservation who are interested in the old ways, who feel the pull of tradition even if they don't fully understand it yet. Kids who ask questions about the ceremonies, who want to learn the language, who sense that there's something important in their heritage that they're missing. I watch them carefully, looking for the one who might have the capacity for this work, the intelligence, the discipline, the spiritual sensitivity, the willingness to sacrifice, because that's what this requires. A sacrifice. You don't maintain boundaries with the beings in the mountains by doing it part-time, by fitting it in around the rest of your life. You do it by giving yourself to it completely, by making it the center of everything you are. I haven't found the right person yet, but I'm looking. I have to be. In the meantime, I do my job. I patrol the roads and respond to calls and follow the protocols. Both the ones on the laminated sheet in the break room and the older ones that Isaac taught me. I've become known as the officer you call when something doesn't make sense, when the normal explanations don't fit, when the situation requires understanding that goes beyond standard police training. Captain Running Elk has formalized it now. I'm the department's liaison for what she calls cultural incidents, which is her way of saying the things we can't put in reports. When those calls come in, I'm the one who responds. I work with Naomi when our shifts align, and we don't talk about what happened to her in the meadow, about those hours or days when she was in the space between, breathing their air and drinking their water and starting to forget who she was. We don't need to talk about it. She knows what I did to get her back. She knows the price I'm paying, the lifetime of ceremonies and offerings I committed to in exchange for her return. Sometimes, when we're parked on a ridge at sunset watching the light fade over the mountains, she'll reach over and squeeze my hand without saying anything. That's enough. That's her way of saying she understands, she's grateful. She's sorry I have to carry this weight. And my way of saying it's worth it. She's worth it. Keeping her in this world, keeping her herself, that's worth whatever it costs me. She's different now, though. Changed by what happened to her. Quieter. More watchful. She used to joke around on shift, tell stories, fill the silence with easy conversation. Now she's more likely to sit in silence, staring out the window at the landscape passing by, her eyes tracking the tree line like she's looking for something, or someone. Sometimes I catch her at the end of shift, standing in the parking lot, staring up at the mountains with an expression I can't read. Not fear, exactly, something more complicated. Like she's listening for something, like part of her is still up there, in that high meadow, in that space between. I asked her about it once, a few weeks after she came back to work. We were driving out to a call, just the two of us, and I finally said, "Naomi, are you okay? Really okay?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I remember some of it. Not all of it, but pieces. Being in a place that wasn't quite real, wasn't quite solid. Seeing things that didn't have fixed shapes. Feeling myself starting to drift. Like I was becoming less defined. Less me." She looked at me. "You got there just in time, Elias. Another few hours, maybe less, and I don't think I would have wanted to come back. I don't think I would have remembered there was anything to come back to. But you did come back. You're here now." "I'm here, but sometimes," she hesitated. "Sometimes I feel like I left something up there. Some piece of myself that I can't get back. And sometimes I feel like something followed me down. Some connection to that place that I can't break." She shook her head. "I don't know if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. It was exactly what I was afraid of. The beings don't let go easily. Once they've touched you, once you've been in their space, you're marked. Connected. Part of you belongs to them forever. "If it gets bad," I said, "if you start feeling like you're slipping, you tell me. Immediately. There are ceremonies, protections. I can help." She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she wasn't sure anyone could help. That she was carrying something now that she'd carry for the rest of her life. Another price paid, another consequence of the boundaries being crossed. The mountains are still there, of course. They'll always be there. They were there before any people walked this land, and they'll be there long after we're gone. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving a lonely stretch of road with no other headlights visible and the stars spread out overhead like scattered salt, I'll feel them watching me. It's not something I can explain exactly, not something I could describe in a report. It's a feeling of attention, of awareness, of something vast and ancient and patient turning its gaze toward me and taking note. It used to frighten me. In the early days when I first started learning the truth about what was out there, I was scared all the time. Every shadow could be hiding something. Every sound in the night could be a warning. I'd lie awake in my trailer, listening to the wind, imagining all the things that might be moving in the darkness outside. I'm not scared anymore. Not like that. The fear has been replaced by something else. Respect, maybe, or acceptance. I know what's out there now. I know what it wants, what it needs, what it will do if those needs aren't met. And I know my role in the arrangement, my place in the system that keeps everything in balance. The fear has become something more like awareness, constant, vigilant awareness of the weight on my shoulders and the consequences if I fail. Sometimes, when the weight gets heavy, I drive out to Thomas's place. Not Thomas the hiker, but Thomas Running Wolf, an elder who died before I was born but who built a cabin up near the border that's still standing. It's abandoned now, has been for decades, but it's in a spot with a view of the whole valley, and on clear nights you can see all the way to the peaks of Glacier. I go there to think, to remember why I'm doing this, to feel connected to the generations of people who came before me, who lived on this land and loved it and understood what it required of them. It was at Thomas's cabin, about a month ago, that I finally let myself think about the future. Not just the immediate future, not just the next ceremony or the next incident, but the long future. What happens after me? What happens if I fail? Isaac said the agreement had held for thousands of years. Thousands of years of ceremonies performed, boundaries maintained, promises kept. Generation after generation of keepers doing this work, passing it down, making sure the chain didn't break. And now it was down to me, one person, one lifetime. And if I failed, if I forgot or faltered or died before I could pass it on, I thought about the 3 hikers who were never found, about Megan Cole and the terror frozen on her face, about Naomi in that meadow, starting to forget her own name. I thought about what the being had said to me. If you fail, we will take not just one, we will take many, and there will be no coming back. The stakes couldn't be higher, the margin for error couldn't be smaller, and I was the only one standing between those stakes and the people I'd sworn to protect. Some days that feels impossible. Some days I want to run, to leave the reservation, to go somewhere far away where the mountains can't watch me, and the weight isn't mine to carry. I could do it. I could walk away and let someone else figure it out. Let the boundaries fail. Let whatever happens happen. I could have a normal life somewhere, a life without the ceremonies and offerings and the constant awareness of things that shouldn't exist. But I know I won't. I know I'll stay, and I'll do the work, and I'll carry the weight until I can't carry it anymore. Because this is my home. These are my people. And because I made a promise, and I don't break promises, not even when they cost me everything. Last week, we got a call about a BIA agent who was coming to the reservation to investigate the disappearances. His name was Thomas Harlan, and he was everything you'd expect from a federal investigator. Serious, methodical, completely confident in his ability to find rational explanations for irrational events. He showed up at the station on a Tuesday morning in a dark suit and polished shoes, carrying a briefcase full of files and a mandate from Washington to figure out why so many people had gone missing or died on Blackfeet land in the past year. Captain Running Elk handled him with her usual calm professionalism. She answered his questions, provided the files he requested, introduced him to the relevant officers, said all the right things in all the right ways. She'd been doing this job for 20 years. She knew how to manage federal attention without giving anything away. But afterwards, when Harlan was in the conference room reviewing case files, she called me into her office. "He's going to want to see the sights," she said. "Cutbank Creek, the Spotted Eagle Ranch, Badger Creek, where Naomi was taken. He's going to want to walk the ground, look at the evidence, try to piece together what happened. I know. You're going to need to go with him, Keep him safe. Keep him from doing anything that violates the protocols." She paused. "And keep him from learning anything we can't afford to have in a federal report." "Yes, ma'am." I spent the next 2 days driving Agent Harlan around the reservation. We went to every site associated with the incidents, and at each one he did the same thing. Walked the area, took photographs, made notes, asked questions. He was thorough. I'll give him that. He had a sharp eye for detail and a methodical approach to evidence. If we'd been dealing with normal crimes, murders, kidnappings, even serial killings, he probably would have been exactly the right person to investigate. But we weren't dealing with normal crimes, and everything he saw, everything he documented, everything he tried to fit into his frameworks and theories, none of it touched the truth. At the Cutbank Creek site, he spent an hour examining the area where we'd found Megan Cole's vehicle. The tracks were still visible, faded but present, those elongated prints that didn't match any known animal. He photographed them, measured them, compared them to reference images on his phone. "These tracks," he said, crouching down to study them more closely. "They're unusual. I've never seen anything quite like them." Wildlife officer took samples when we first found them. Results were inconclusive. Inconclusive how? They couldn't identify the species. He looked at me. "Officer Red Crow, there are only so many large animals in this region. If these tracks don't match any of them, then either they're fake, manufactured somehow, or they were made by something that isn't in the databases." He paused. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I held his gaze. "There are things on this land that don't fit into databases, Agent Harlan. Things that have been here for a very long time. The people who've lived here for generations know about them. We've learned how to coexist with them, but they're not something that can be explained through federal investigation or written up in reports." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head and went back to his photographs. We had a similar conversation at the Spotted Eagle Ranch, where I showed him the area the cattle had been killed. Leonard, Spotted Eagle, came out to talk to us, and he told Harlan the same thing he'd told me, that he'd been ranching for 40 years and had never seen anything like what killed those animals. Harlan listened, took notes, asked about predator populations in the area, about diseases that might cause the symptoms we'd observed. Leonard answered patiently, but I could see in his eyes that he knew it was pointless. Harlan was looking for explanations that didn't exist. At Badger Creek, where Naomi had been taken, Harlan stood at the spot where we'd found her radio and her weapon and stared into the trees for a long time without speaking. The tracks were gone now, washed away by rain and snow, but the place still had that feeling, that sense of being watched, of being close to something that wasn't quite part of our world. "This is where Officer Birdstone was taken," he said finally. "Yes, and she was found 3 days later, alive, with no memory of where she'd been." "That's correct. And you have no explanation for what happened to her." "We have explanations. They're just not ones that would make sense to you." He turned to look at me. "Try me." I thought about what to say. I thought about telling him the truth, about the beings, the boundaries, the ceremonies, the agreement I'd made in the meadow, about what it really meant to maintain order on this land, to keep people safe from things they couldn't understand. Part of me wanted to tell him. Part of me was tired of carrying the secret alone. But I knew how it would sound. I knew he'd think I was crazy, or lying, or covering up something criminal. And I knew that even if he believed me, there was nothing he could do with the information. You can't investigate beings that exist outside of normal reality. You can't arrest something that doesn't have a physical form. You can't write a federal report about the price of forgotten ceremonies and broken boundaries. So, I said, the explanations involve traditional beliefs, spiritual understandings that have been part of Blackfeet culture for thousands of years. They're not something I can summarize for a federal investigation. Try anyway. I looked towards the mountains. There are beings out there, in the high places, in the spaces we don't go. They've been there for a very long time, longer than the Blackfeet, longer than any people. For generations there were agreements between us and them. Boundaries, rules. As long as those were respected, they stayed in their places and we stayed in ours. But when the agreements are broken, when the boundaries aren't maintained, they come down. Harlan finished. His voice was flat, skeptical. And they take people. Yes. And you believe this. I know this. I've seen it. I've dealt with it. I'm dealing with it right now. He was quiet for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. Officer Red Crow, I respect that you have strong cultural beliefs, but I'm here to conduct a federal investigation into deaths and disappearances on this reservation, and I can't include supernatural explanations in my report. I need evidence, I need facts. I need things that can be verified and documented and presented to my supervisors in Washington. Then your report is going to be incomplete. Maybe, but it's going to be the report I write. We drove back to the station without speaking. I could feel his frustration, his sense that I was hiding something from him, keeping him from the truth he'd come here to find. And I was hiding something from him. Just not the kind of something he was imagining. He spent another 2 days on the reservation, reviewing files, re-interviewing witnesses, going over the evidence again and again like he might find something he'd missed. Then he packed up his briefcase and his photographs and his notes, and he went back to Washington. A week later, Captain Running Elk showed me his report. It attributed the incidents to a combination of factors: environmental hazards, wildlife activity, isolated criminal acts, and, this was my favorite part, cultural practices that may have contributed to risk-taking behavior in wilderness areas. It was neat, it was clean, it explained everything without explaining anything. It satisfied his supervisors and closed the cases, and allowed everyone to move on without having to confront the reality of what was actually happening on this land. It was also completely wrong. But that's how it always is. That's how it has to be. The truth about what's out there in the mountains, what we deal with on this reservation, what I do to keep the boundaries holding, it can't be in reports. It can't be on official records. It stays between us, the ones who know, the ones who maintain the balance, the ones who keep the old promises. Sometimes I wonder if that's sustainable, if we can keep the truth hidden forever, keep doing what we're doing without anyone outside understanding or helping. I wonder what happens when the beings decide the agreement isn't being honored, when they start taking more people, more frequently, in ways that can't be explained away as wildlife attacks or exposure or getting lost. I wonder what happens when the federal investigators stop accepting our non-answers, when they start digging deeper, when they uncover something that forces them to confront what's really going on. I wonder what happens if I fail, if I can't find someone to pass the knowledge to, if the chain breaks with me, and the ceremonies stop, and the boundaries fall. I think about those 3 hikers who were never found. I think about Megan Cole, and the terror frozen on her face. I think about Naomi in that meadow, breathing the air of a place that wasn't quite real, forgetting who she was. I think about what the being said to me. We will take many, and there will be no coming back. Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I lie in my trailer and listen to the wind and imagine what it would look like if the boundaries failed completely. If the beings came down from the mountains in force, not just testing and probing, but taking what they wanted without restraint. I imagine the roads empty, the homes abandoned, the reservation turning into a place where no one could live, where the old agreements had been broken beyond repair and the consequences had finally come due. And then I get up, and I make coffee, and I go back to work. Because imagining the worst doesn't help anyone. Because the only thing that matters is doing what I can, for as long as I can, to hold things together. That's what Isaac told me near the end. He said, "The work isn't about winning. It isn't about fixing everything forever. It's about doing what you can, for as long as you can, to maintain the balance. That's all any of us can do. That's all any of us have ever done. So, that's what I do. I patrol the roads, and I respond to calls, and I follow the protocols. I perform the ceremonies when the moon is right, alone in high places where the boundaries are thin, speaking words that are older than my language and making offerings that I hope are enough. I teach what I know to anyone who wants to learn, and I watch for the one who might be able to take my place someday. I maintain the boundaries and I keep the promises, and I hope it's enough. And when I'm out there at night driving one of those lonely roads with the mountains rising up on either side and the darkness pressing close, I don't pretend anymore that I'm alone. I know they're watching. I know they're always watching. But I also know that as long as I do my part, they'll do theirs. We have an agreement. It's held for thousands of years. Maybe it'll hold for a few more. There's one more thing I need to tell you. One more thing that happened last week that made me decide to finally write all of this down and share it with whoever might be listening. I was out on patrol, late shift, covering the northern sector near the Canadian border. It was a clear night, cold, with a full moon so bright it turned the landscape silver and cast shadows that looked solid enough to touch. The mountains were visible for once, not hidden by clouds or darkness, their peaks sharp against the stars like teeth biting into the sky. I just finished a welfare check on an elderly couple who lived alone about 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, and I was heading back toward Browning, driving slow, letting the night settle around me. That's when I saw something on the road ahead. It was a figure, standing in the middle of the pavement, motionless, facing away from me. Just standing there like it was waiting for something, or like it had forgotten why it was there in the first place. I slowed down, put on my spotlight, tried to see who it was. The light hit the figure from behind, throwing a long shadow toward me, and I could see it was a woman. Young, maybe early 20s, wearing hiking clothes, boots, cargo pants, a fleece jacket. Her hair was loose, hanging down her back, and she wasn't moving at all. Not shifting her weight, not turning toward the light. Just standing. I stopped the truck about 20 yards away and got out slowly, my hand near my weapon, but not on it. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need help?" Nothing, no response, not even a twitch to show she'd heard me. I walked closer, my boots crunching on the gravel at the edge of the pavement, the sound loud in the silence. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Red Crow with the Tribal Police. Can you hear me? Can you tell me what's going on?" She turned around. Her face was pale, almost white in the moonlight, and her eyes were wrong, distant, unfocused, looking at something that wasn't there. But she was real. She was solid. She was standing on this road in the middle of the night, and she was human, and she was in some kind of trouble I couldn't immediately identify. "I was hiking," she said. Her voice was hollow, like it was coming from far away, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "I went too far. I went into a place I shouldn't have gone, and they found me." "Who found you? Ma'am, where have you been? Can you tell me your name?" She looked at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition. Memory. The beginnings of understanding. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't remember. I just woke up on this road, and I don't know how I got here. And I don't know how long I've been gone. I don't—" Her voice cracked. "I don't know who I am." I took her back to the station and called in the details. Captain Running Elk met us there, along with a paramedic team from Browning, and we started the process of figuring out who she was and what had happened to her. It took a while. She had no ID on her, no phone, nothing to indicate her identity. We ran her description through missing persons databases and waited for a hit. It came back within the hour. Her name was Sarah Chen. She was 26 years old, from Portland, Oregon. She'd been reported missing 3 months ago from a trailhead near East Glacier, where she'd set out on a solo backpacking trip and never returned. Search teams had looked for her for 2 weeks before calling off the search. Her family had held a memorial service. Her case was considered closed. 3 months. She'd been gone 3 months and she had no memory of where she'd been or what had happened to her. 3 months in whatever place the beings took people to. 3 months breathing their air, drinking their water, feeling herself drift and dissolve and forget. But they let her go. I don't know why. I don't know if it was random, a whim, or if there was something about her that made them release her when they'd kept so many others. I don't know if it was connected to the ceremonies I've been performing, the boundaries I've been maintaining. Maybe it was a reward, maybe it was a test, maybe it was a message. If it was a message, I think I understand it. I think they were telling me they're still there. Still watching. Still deciding who stays and who goes, who lives and who disappears, who gets to walk out of the wilderness and who gets swallowed by it forever. They were reminding me that the agreement is fragile, that it requires constant attention, constant maintenance, constant proof that we remember and we honor and we keep our promises. They were reminding me that the mountains are watching. Sarah Chen is in a hospital in Great Falls now, being evaluated by doctors who can't explain what happened to her. The FBI is involved, asking questions, looking for answers they're never going to find. Her family blew in from Portland, her parents, her sister, and they sit by her bed and hold her hand and try to help her remember who she was before. She's making progress, they say. Bits and pieces are coming back. She remembers her childhood, her college years, her job at an architecture firm. But the 3 months she was missing are blank, a void, and the doctors don't know if that memory will ever return. Maybe it's better if it doesn't. Maybe some things are better left forgotten. If you're reading this, I don't know what you'll do with it. Maybe you'll think I'm crazy. Maybe you'll think this is just a story, a creepy tale to tell around a campfire, or share on some forum where people post things that scared them. That's fine. Believe what you want to believe. I'm not writing this to convince you of anything. I'm writing this because I need someone to know, because I've been carrying this alone for too long and the weight is getting heavy, and I need to put it down somewhere, even if that somewhere is just words on a screen that might never be read by anyone. But if you do read this, if you're out there listening, I need you to understand something. The things I've told you are true. The beings in the mountains are real. The boundaries that keep them in their places, and us in ours, are real. The ceremonies that maintain those boundaries, the agreements that have held for thousands of years, all of it is real. I know because I've seen it. I've touched it. I've spent 6 months of my life learning it and performing it and paying the price for it. And if you ever come to Blackfeet land, if you ever drive these roads or hike these trails or stand in the shadow of these mountains, I need you to remember what I've told you. Remember the rules. Don't go into the wilderness alone after dark. Don't follow tracks that look wrong. Don't investigate sounds that don't have clear sources. If you hear whistling in the trees, if you see shapes at the edge of your vision, if you feel something watching you that you can't see, leave. Immediately. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to investigate. Just leave. And if you feel the mountains watching you, if you feel that ancient attention settling on your shoulders, that sense of something vast and patient turning its gaze towards you, don't ignore it. Respect it. Honor it. Remember that you're on their land, and you're only here because they allow it.